Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward, and this is Face to Face. Our guest this week is Métis writer, director, and musician Shane Belcourt. He released his first feature film, Ti Karanto, in 2007. Belcourt also directed the documentary Beautiful Scars, based on the book and life of internationally acclaimed musician and artist Tom Wilson. Among Belcourt's other works is the show Amplify, which he created and airs on APTN. His most recent documentary is Ni-Naadamaadiz, Red Power Rising, a documentary about an Indigenous-led occupation in Anicinabe Park over nearly 40 days in 1974, when 150 people took over the park in Kenora in protest over the ongoing mistreatment of Indigenous peoples. Shane, thanks so much for joining us this week, and congrats on the new documentary.
Tansei, Dennis. I'm happy to be here. This is exciting.
Well, we're certainly excited. Unless you're from a certain part of the country or a certain age, people might not know about the 1974 uprising there. Can you give us a rundown of what went down?
Yeah, I mean, the time of they call it the Red Scare. And you think like, oh, in some parlance, that would mean like sort of rise of communism. Right. But there was, Black Power rising in the States and in the late 60s and early 70s. And that definitely found its way over the border. The American Indian movement, John Trudell and all those guys doing Alcatraz and Wounded Knee and all those things. That momentum had really shifted and changed what was going on up here on the north of Medicine Line. And then it had a big effect on lots of nations across Canada. So Cache Creek in BC had an uprising. There was obviously this one that this documentary is about, Anicinabe Park in 1974. And that was also, my dad, Tony Belcourt, why he left Alberta, moved to Ottawa to fight for rights on the nation's capital. So it was a really exciting time writ large. But there's always been, as we know in our communities, a sort of a conversation, a battle between grassroots organizing and what we do there in each of our individual nations, and then what happens on that sort of larger political sphere, and how we organize and we're trying to make change within the system, so to speak, and how the arguments we have amongst our families about what's the better way to go. And in Anishinaabe Park in 1974, things had gotten extremely, extremely dire. The people there, the young people there, were basically told that if you were an Indigenous man and you lived above the age of 25, you can consider yourself lucky. So that's how quickly people were dying. They were leaving their communities after residential school, which a lot of people know about, and how that was like, and people going to the cities to try to find jobs and survive, which were not there. So with those dim prospects, a whole bunch of super young people, like super, super young people, led by Louis Cameron, Louis Bird, and others, Tommy Kijik, they organized in Anishinaabe Park first just to have a conference about what should we do as young people. And then after the 3-day conference, they said, we should stay here in the park and we should make our demands and we will reclaim this park, Anishinaabe Park, which was theirs as part of Overall Treaty 3, as their own. And so they stayed there for 2 months in an armed, occupied occupation, which led to lots of press and military and all the rest of it.
Well, as somebody who's covered Northern Ontario for almost 2 decades now, I was kind of aware of this, knew of it, but not to the extent that the documentary gets into, obviously. But how did you come to hear the story of what happened?
Way back when I was asked to direct 2 Heritage Canada Historica minutes. And if we've all seen those back in my day, our day, they used to play before you went to the movies. They were the first thing you saw was a little Historica minute. I'm Joe Namath and, basketball. And so the one that they were thinking about doing when I was brought on was perhaps doing Anishinaabe Park in 1974. And I had never heard of it before myself. And they had this old Canadian Dimensions article, which was at the time this sort of left-wing communist magazine in Canada, Canadian Dimensions, did a 12-page fulsome article. It was actually quite impressive. The quotes, the interviews, the capturing the racism, people saying things on the record, which you would never say in today's, world, of just what their views were of Indigenous people in Kenora. And it was a really striking article. And then I thought, oh, wow, that'd make a great minute. But for whatever reason, they wanted to go somewhere else. So it just kind of lingered in the back of my mind. And then when Tanya Talega and her company, Makwa Productions, had said, hey, we've done an episode of a podcast on this uprising in 1974. We now want to do a longer form project, in this case, a feature documentary. Would I be willing to direct it? I was like, oh my God, it has something that about it that's very exciting to me. One is, in 1974, as I was referencing before, Dennis, like this idea of the Red Scare, as we found our voices, as people stopped hiding their smiles and coming forward and their laughter, that time of the 60s and late 60s, early 70s was so electric. Everybody looks so freaking cool. You know what I mean? The headbands, I was just like the long hair. I'm like, this is like rock and roll. Everyone looks at they're going to front a Rush cover band or something. Like, I mean, I got to do this. But then also the stuff behind it. What are those echoes? How is it playing out today? When did our people, like in my case, my dad and his generation, when did they stand up, and why did they stand up, and how did that affect us today? Did anything change?
Yeah, we'll get to that. One thing that I didn't really know about, and that was Louis Cameron and his role. Can you tell us about Louis and the role he played?
So as I mentioned, there was like a group of young Indigenous men in Kenora that decided to get together and do this. And when I say young, they're like 22 to 25 years old, and Tommy Kijik, Ronnie Seymour, and Louis Cameron and Joe Bird. They were all sort of part of this. They just were thinking, what could we do? And Louis just had, if you see the clips in the doc, he's so soft-spoken. But when he comes to writing, or his quotes of what he's saying, they are just like out of the park home runs. Like, he really knows how to crystallize exactly what it is that is the dynamic of suppression or colonial, disempowerment or struggle and survival and love for who we are, and to put it into a framing that's very easy to understand. And so he was the one who became the spokesperson and the de facto leader of the Anicinabe Park uprising. And he was just a guy from, White Dog. That was it. Just a guy who survived residential school and wound up on this, working and trying to find jobs in Kenora, and wound up leading an occupation, and then the Canadian caravan across Canada, which wound up on Parliament Hill.
Yeah. You and I aren't this old, but the treatment of Indigenous peoples anywhere in 1974 was probably likely not that different in other places. Well, why do you think Kenora in particular became a flashpoint?
Yeah, I mean, you would think there would be nonstop flashpoints in so many places since almost contact, so you could definitely just pick another place and do it there. What was interesting, in a way tragic, about Kenora, they called it, that area, the Alabama of the North. And that was something that was in Maclean's magazine. That was something that was sort of course, the people of Kenora would never hear of it. Kenora at that time, its situation in Canada, if you want to go across Ontario and into the west, or in the west into the southeast, you got to go through the way the architecture of Canada is through Kenora. All the highways go through there. All the pipelines of infrastructure, railway, telecommunications, they go through Kenora. It's also the place that had the most amount of residential schools in one location. It was a place where you could take people from all northern Ontario and some parts of Manitoba and just put them into this one convenient location. So in that sense, it almost became a powder keg of ideas, a powder keg of people coming together and being stuck there. But it was also a place where it was extremely racist. It was, other people say, oh, it's extremely racist everywhere. Yes, but this place was extremely racist. And it also is set next to the glory of cottage industry. Mm-hmm. Kenora's population sways as all the rich people come up and go to their cottages outside Kenora. And Kenora is a place where you get all your things you need. American fishermen landing in Kenora and going on to do their tourism fishing. So it's a place that has a lot of wealth set against a lot of very, very strict division of white and red. And so that place just had the dynamic. Of course, it's also people too, right? And that's why we just mentioned Louis Cameron, Tommy Kijik, these others. They just happened to be the right people at the right time.
What role do you think, if any, what happened at Wounded Knee shortly before this played in the efforts to take back the park?
The actions of the American Indian movement, every single one of the people there, men and women, aunties, uncles, everyone talks about what was going on at that time and what they had seen in the American Indian movement. And it's hard for us to, I think, imagine where our people didn't feel they had the right to have their voice. And coming out of that, such a wave that was, it was bound to combust out, as I was describing earlier. And what the American Indian movement did, to just sort of, I'm going to grow my hair long because you think that's a no good. I think it's where my power is. I'm going to stand up and say whatever it is I say, and I'm not going to be polite about it anymore. And that sort of, Canadian right now, the elbows up kind of thing. That was that first moment where people were like, I know who I am when I'm in my community, and I know who you think I am when I'm in your white community, and I'm not going to code it anymore. I'm going to be exactly who I am, and you have to change. And that was like something that was very, forward and very pushing. In America, if you watch any clips of anything to do with the American Indian movement, that's what they kind of were like. And how could you not feel inspired? So it ricocheted across Canada.
Shane, much more to talk about here with the documentary and some of your other work. We just have to step out for a quick break, and then we'll continue the conversation here on Face to Face. Stick around. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is filmmaker Shane Belcourt, and we've been speaking about the recently released documentary Ni-Naadamaadiz, Red Power Rising. And, Shane, I wanted to talk about some of the other events that came after what happened in Anicinabe Park. You kind of touched on a few of them there, but also in particular Oka and Ipperwash. Those both turned fatal. Do you think there was a possibility Anicinabe Park could have seen some real violence?
Absolutely. There was an enormous amount of police presence around Anishinaabe Park, and I'll just back up real quick. I had always assumed that this documentary could exist almost like if you've seen the documentary MLK versus the FBI. So in that sense, they had so much archival footage, right. Police transcripts, tapes, audio when they're listening on MLK's phone calls, etc. So I thought, oh, we'll have all that because in the 7 minutes of footage we do have of the occupation, there's nothing but police presence. Mm-hmm. And so you think, oh, there'll be tons of stuff. And there simply is not.
I did want to ask you about that because the archive footage and interviews in the documentary is incredible, but like you said, there's very, very little of it. How did you come across it, and how did you make a 90-minute documentary with so little?
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the things that, just to follow up, to close out that last one, so we assumed that the police would have all the stuff because their presence was felt, and there's stories of police firing their guns into the park. Thankfully, nobody got shot. But when we found out that all that footage that they had was destroyed, the OPP, nothing. Oh, it's beyond the record. So even though it included so much material on the day, and news cameras were there, but they shot on 16 and everything got ruined, or audio tapes were taped over, we really were stuck with nothing. Yeah. So in that sense, we were like, okay, well, what's the next wave of the movie that we could try? So the next thing we tried to do is speak to people we knew we were going to, but let's speak to people who were there on the day. Let's talk to them. Maybe they can fill it in and we'll do reenactments. And then some people were like, Winona Wilder. tells an amazing story of almost getting shot in the documentary. And then I asked her, what was happening on at the headquarters? Like, what were people thinking about? How did you organize? She's like, oh, I was just a potato peeler.
Yeah.
So you're like, oh, how do I get to that next level? And then Tyler Cameron, Louis' son, he said, hey, with this manuscript my dad wrote, it's unpublished. Would it be helpful to you? And then once we were like, I'm like, are you kidding me, Tyler? So here's a book that Louis Cameron wrote that wasn't published. That's in his words, in his like, I did this and we did that and we saw that and I did this. And he wrote it just as this amazing treatment. And he was so detailed. And once we had that last piece, we kind of had three things we were now going to weave. Whatever archive we could have from the day, interviews with experts, and then Tyler and his dad interacting with the manuscript. And all three things became what the doc is.
Right. Well, you had a world premiere at TIFF, which it doesn't get much better than that, I guess. So what's been the reaction?
You know, I was only really concerned with kind of two people's reaction. Well, I shouldn't lie, three people's reaction. Number one was the Cameron family. So Tyler, Grey Wolf, Louis Jr., and others. What did they think about the documentary, which really kind of features their dad? And I consider the documentary a love song to Louis Cameron, right? It's who he was and what he did and what he stood for. And they were quite moved by the movie, and they stand by it. So that was number one. Yeah. Number two was sort of the leadership at the time then and now, who, you know, did we get it right? Did we get the politics right? And they're like, yes, absolutely. And the last one would just be my dad. You know, my dad was Indigenous rights leader who I said left his community in 1971 to do leadership on Capitol Hill with Parliament Hill, rather, with Harry Daniels and others. And my dad was like, you did that story service. So when people are saying that we got something right that I was not there for, I feel really, really that have been helpful to raise the voices.
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, you spent a lot of time in Kenora making the film. Wondering how much you think the small city has changed in the past 50 years. Carla Cotton, who I've known for many years, says in the film something along the lines of, being in Kenora is like being in the presence of genocide.
Yeah, Kyler. Oh my God, I've worked with him on a couple projects. He's just so articulate and penetrating and fearless. Yeah, I mean, when you film there, it's two things that we all know. The first part you don't often see or talk about is how often people are in their homes playing cards, having meals, laughing and loving. We perpetuate ourselves and our identity not because we're just stories of suffering, but there's so much more to who we are. So that needs to be said when we speak writ large about the area of Kenora. But when you say something, when you're there, it's impossible not to notice on the streets. As you see across, I mean, I'm in Vancouver right now, or if I'm in Edmonton or Calgary or Winnipeg, you know, a lot of our people are still suffering, are still struggling. A lot of our people from systemic racism and, you know, colonial institutions and all these things we know. They're out there, and you see it in Kenora quite a lot. So that atomic bomb, if you will, of cultural genocide in the form of residential schools still plays out very, very prevalently in Kenora. Good news is that there is, I think, and they're all, like Kyler was there in the 70s. There are good allies, there are good people, good leadership. Everyone's trying. Nobody wants what they see, but you know, with all the drugs that are out there now and how they affect people's lives drastically, you do see that in that place. Absolutely, 100%. It's and you still hear of violence and people dying there, and like you would in Thunder Bay and others. It's tough.
Yeah. When the 50th anniversary was happening, there was events going on. We were hearing that there was potentially a deal in place to transfer the park land over. A lot of things happened around that time, though, and that transfer never happened. Now it's in the courts. What's your understanding of where things are at?
I mean, no more than what you know. You know, like it is clearly 100% clearly Treaty Three's land. There's no one's that Canada and the town of Kenora and the province of Ontario all just co-opted that land and made it an Anishinaabe Park is without argument, basically. And why it can't be handed over is, I mean,
Yeah, well, I think, Fort Frances, just south of there, finished a decades-long battle over a park too, so you'd think maybe Kenora City Council might see the writing on the wall and save some legal fees. I guess, while a lot of the film is about what happened at Anishinaabe Park and in the town of Kenora, there's a lot more going on. The Native Peoples Caravan and Embassy, the way media portrays Indigenous peoples at the time as well.
yeah. So, I mean, Louis Cameron, who was central to Anishinaabe Park in 1974, was also central with the Native People's Caravan. So he wound up becoming one of the main organizers and spokespersons. And he went out to Cache Creek, BC, and the caravan went all the way across and into Toronto and then and on to Ottawa. And it was they wanted to take what they thought were their and still were their legitimate grievances of Kenora, which were shared in Cache Creek and all these other places that we were talking about in this last bit, Dennis. And they wanted to take it to Ottawa to find like we as grassroots people want to go forward and confront the establishment face to face and say you need to do something that'll help young people. So off they went and they marched, and it was the only time that Canada's ever had armed military on the hills of Parliament, people with bayonets on the end of their guns, like people on horseback that we've seen, and they just dispersed this Native people's crowd. People got their heads cracked open. It was so friggin' bloody and violent and intense. And again, it's another one of these times. Whole bunch of media, whole bunch of surveillance. Hey, can we have copies of your tapes? Poof. Oh, can't find it.
Yeah, we recorded over it. Yeah, that stuff always happens. Shane, definitely, it's a great film. Love the film. Got to watch it this week, and great work there. Hoping to talk about some of your other work, though. We just got to step aside for a quick break, and then we'll continue the conversation here with filmmaker Shane Belcourt. Stick around. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is writer, producer, director Shane Belcourt. And Shane, I definitely wanted to talk about Beautiful Scars, the 2022 documentary you wrote and directed about musician and artist Tom Wilson. As I mentioned to you, I remember when we went to his Hamilton studio to do a face-to-face with him, and he mentioned that a documentary was happening and you were directing, and it was exciting stuff. That documentary is also stellar. Why was Tom's story of finding himself something you wanted to tell?
It was, I think it's important as we get into worlds of identity politics and the complications around all those things. Every one of our viewers knows about that. Yeah. That we really clearly understand when someone says, I grew up outside of it, but I am from it. And both of his parents were Mohawk, and he was raised outside of that. So I just thought the way he approached his identity as an older man, coming to understanding how he was Mohawk. I mean, he always was Mohawk, but he was raised in a white community and in a white life. And his process and his fracturing of how that came out in his life, I just thought was that idea that he would dream about and he would be Mohawk, but he wouldn't know what that meant until he finally had the realization or the documented proof, so to speak. It was an interesting story to sort of to be with him for that.
Well, it is a beautiful one, and I'll just mention that Tom does some of the music for Red Power Rising as well. Your other films like Warrior Strong, Red Rover, Take Toronto are all fictional. Do you have a style you prefer, documentary or a fictional film?
When I went to film school, I never for one second thought I'd ever work on a documentary in my life.
Really?
The fact that I've made so many documentaries is shocking to me. I'm excited to be working on a mini series right now for CBC with Tasha Hubbard. I can say no more than that, other than it will be coming out in a couple years. We're going to camera this winter for it. So yes, there is lots of narrative work in the works, and I'm thankful for that. It is I can't say it's one I prefer, but when I make documentaries, Dennis, I've said it before, I am not a documentary filmmaker. I'm a propaganda filmmaker, and I want to celebrate who we are, and I will not be unabashed about that.
Well, I would say the two documentaries, at least that you have done so far, are both award winners. You've mentioned your dad a couple of times. You know, your family includes some famous advocates, politicians, artists. What drew you into film?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So, I mean, my sister's Christy Belcourt, the painter, and then my dad, Tony Belcourt, Indigenous rights advocate and leader, Auntie Maria and Harry Daniels always around, Lawrence Gladue, all these amazing luminaries of movement, of thought, of love for who we are. And then when I was like, I'm not that guy. I'm a little goofy. I like to have fun. I like to think through things, but I definitely want to not be a politician. I'm very uncomfortable in that space, and I love movies. Just, you know what I mean? I mean, you're sitting there and the logo comes on. I used to be able to hum every single production company's logo song, you know, and I just was like, this is just so transformative. I am Luke Skywalker, you know, I am all these people. I am Indiana Jones. Like, how does that happen? You know, and that was just an art form that I was enthralled by.
Yeah. Well, I also wanted to talk about a show that you created, Amplify, which airs on APTN. I believe it just wrapped up its third season. Can you tell us what your vision was for that show?
You know, I'm a musician myself. I love playing music. And when I watched the documentary Sonic Highways with Dave Grohl, where he went to different cities and just wrote a song about that city, I thought, wouldn't it be amazing if we asked an Indigenous songwriter to say, pick something Indigenous to be inspired by and write a new song about it. And then we just fused these experts who wrote the thing, and then the songwriter who's now making a song. We thought, what would it be like just to explore the idea of songwriting? And then from that, you're talking about everything. You could talk about love, you could talk about nationhood, you could talk about fears. And that was what that show was. Just, I want to be around musicians because they're my favorite people.
Yeah, such a great show. I know you kind of stepped back from having your hands involved in everything there, but I hope it's coming back for another season as well.
Yeah, I love making that show.
Well, Shane, again, congrats on the new doc and all the previous work. You're building up quite the body of work there, and really appreciate you taking some time for us here on the show this week.
And thanks for all the things you're doing, Dennis. I love watching your show.
Thanks. That's all the time we have for Face to Face this week. You can catch up on any episodes you may have missed by visiting our website, aptnnews.ca, or our APTN News page on YouTube. Of course, this episode and all of our previous episodes are also available as podcasts. You can find those wherever you choose to download your audio from. I'm Dennis Ward. Marcy Miigwech. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you back here in 7 days.